Hello humans, welcome back to this video tutorial series. So now we're going to start talking about rigging and animating. As you can see, I'm just going to open my channel box here real quick. As you can see, we have everything we really need in terms of geometry. I'm just going to turn the the terrain off here, our static stuff, and this is our player character. This is our worm. Assuming I can select it. Can I select it? Yes, there we go. So as you can see, it's complete, but we need to start making it move because frankly, we can't just have it in, we need to have it move around. We need to have animations set up. And we're going to talk about animating stuff. But before that, we need to set one thing clear. Now, before you can animate something, there's really two ways you can animate an object, okay? One way to animate it, okay, is just regular animation stuff. So if we take our object and we put it here and we set a key, and then in other words we tell Maya that this is the starting point of our animation, and then after like 30 frames, right, we can get out the frame bar, but not just yet. We're not going to animate just yet, but there will be a frame bar here. You can select a frame bar. Actually, we can maybe show it here real quick. Let me see, where was it? I think it has to be through the Windows UI elements and time slider. So this is our frame bar, and as you can see, if we can tell it for like frame 1, press S to set it, and then we go over here, go to frame 30, set it here, right? And then if we go and play the animation, you will see that it'll be moving every frame from one point to another. Now, this is quite simple. I'm just pressing S on one side and S on the other side. And this is the basis of any animation here. You essentially press S to set something, right? Be it what's its face? The transform of the object. Obviously, you can modify it, so we can say that in the middle of the animation, our object will be somewhere here. So it'll be like this kind of curve. We set the key here, and now if we play it, you will see that it does this thing here. But this does not really work for us because we don't need set animations like these unless we're doing a cinematic. So this does not work for us. I think there was a shortcut for deleting these. Yeah, it's just regular delete, believe it or not. Oh, whoa, I deleted the freaking object. Okay, I'm not sure if which shortcut was for deleting the key, so I'm gonna just delete this manually for now. But in general, you understand how this works. Now, obviously, we can start, delete that stuff. Obviously, we can start and maybe move some other stuff. So this does not only apply to the object. We can start and say, go and select a couple of faces and just move them upwards, like so. Obviously, maybe with soft select a little bit. Well, this is a little bit too brutal. Maybe something like this and something like this, right? And maybe select these faces here and just move them a little bit more. So it would be something like that, right? And this would be your second frame or third frame, and you could have this kind of movement. So you'd have this bit here. Obviously, you turn it on. But this is a vertex animation, right? This is called vertex animation, and as such, it is set. Okay, this is nice when you want to have something transform. Okay, so if we use some deformers here. Let me just turn off this. If we use a deformer or something, right, like a lattice, and basically modify this object so that it twists along the way, we could modify this and animate it as such. But in general, these are vertex animations, and they're not ideal for characters. This is ideal for one-off stuff, like for example, if you had your gun transform from a pistol to a rocket launcher, you would do that transformation with a lattice maybe, and a couple of other vertex animation setups here and other settings. I'm just going to go ahead and turn this off for now because we're not going to be animating just yet. What we are going to be doing, we're going to be talking about rigging, because in our case, we want to be able to essentially manipulate this object here, which is our player character, and set up different animations for a different state, right? We want to be able to walk left and right. Well, in our case, it's just walk one way, and we're going to take care of the movement in its own self. However, this will also allow us to raise anatomical things, such as, let's say, if we put a we need something that can basically manipulate this part of the mesh, right? Let's just go and select this part of the mesh and manipulate it. Much like the soft select, just like I showed you just now, it'd be nice if we could have some kind of object that once, let me just make this a little bit smaller. Like ideally, I'd need to grab the tool settings here and go into soft select, and maybe increase the fall off radius to something like this, and then move it that way. But in general, I hope you understand what I'm trying to do here. Essentially, this would mean that, well, we could actually increase the fall off radius even more. I'm just wasting time here actually, because this is quite ridiculous. In our case, we don't really need that. Come on then. Can we make it any smaller? There we go. We could actually change it. We probably have to change the curve here. But I hope you get my idea, right? We need something so that it basically works just on this part of the object, okay? And we don't want to do this every time, right? We don't want to select something and then have to move it every single time we select it. And as such, this does not really work for us, the single click select bit. So there's that. So in this case, we're going to be using a joint. And a joint really is essentially this object where you tell it how much influence is it going to have on these faces here. And depending on how much influence it's got, it's going to move those faces accordingly with a particular fall off. Much like the soft select tool, but a little bit more complicated than that. So these are called joints, and we're going to basically be taking a look into rigging. There's also another way to talk about this, and these are called blend shapes. So this is another type of vertex animation. However, instead of going for movement like left and right like we just did, essentially what you do is you create a duplicate of your object. So I just created a duplicate of our object, and then I don't know, like in this case, maybe we would want to let's say you want it to be shorter, right? So it'd be moving from left to right. So what you do is you go and turn on the symmetry. My bad. Come on. Turn on the symmetry for the object along the which axis now? Let's just use the topology here. Turn off this soft select, and this, I'd say this is probably the middle bit, and then you'd select these bits here and you'd move them a little bit inwards. But as you can see, this does not really work just that well because we have a bunch of polygons. Ideally, we'd need a squash deformer where we would squash this. So you'd have something like that. And then you would basically define it as a separate shape, right? So you'd have, let's say this would be one of your states, and you have another one where it would be some other state. And essentially you click this, or in all of your states, if you have like 15 or something, click those, click the main object, and then you go into your, where is it? Deform, and you go into blend shape and you blend the shapes, right? So if you click the blend shape now, we'll have, I'll just click it, and not much happened, but if we open the attribute editor for this, we go into blend shape here. As you can see, we got weight P cylinder 2, and as we increase the weight, see, I didn't even select the one of the faces. As you can see, I missed the face over here, but essentially this will create like an interpolation between your base shape and the new shape, and as such you can set up several different states. Ideally this is used for facial animations, but in our case this also does not work too well, although definitely it's an option for what we're going to do. But I do think we should do this by rigging, because like I said, blend shapes are ideal. They're like a middle of the road, right? They have vertex, like you could use them for transforming stuff. This would be best used for transforming stuff, actually, because it'd be a lot easier to change states, okay? This would be great for changing states. And I believe this also supports joints. I'm not too sure. I never used it with joints. I don't think they work together very well. Obviously, the cool bit here, I think, is that you can select an object, right? You can change the object here, and I think this should be reflected. Yes, so it gets reflected onto the other object as well. So this allows you to totally control your basically your final shape, as this, per se. So we're gonna delete this. Oh yeah, one more thing. This is a deformer. Remember, this is a deformer. So if you end up deleting all of your history, remember I told you that. Be very careful when you're deleting history. We go here and we go into delete all by type, and we click history. This will no longer have that node. Right? As you can see, that node is gone. There's nothing here, right? If we can open the channel box, you will see that everything is gone. So we can maybe, I don't think we can Control Z this. Can we? Yes, we can Control Z the history, and as you can see, the inputs are back here, and you can still play the the basic blend shape stuff. There's even an envelope here where it basically allows you to change how much influence, like how much of this shape will be influenced on this shape. But anyway, this is it for deformers. So make sure not to delete deformers, especially when you're rigging or you're about to, get animations going, because deformers are important. Stick to deleting non-deformer history most of the time when you need to delete history, or delete all the history on an object that does not have a deformer. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete this object, and well, I need to delete the history anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the history. I think there was a shortcut for deleting all the history. I need to set it up to something more appropriate, like, I don't know, Shift A or Control A in this case, because Control A right now is just opening the attribute editor, but so does Alt Q in my case. But anyway, it's up to you how your stuff is working. Right, so let me just explain how this is going to work. This is just an intro. We're not going to do this just yet. But what I wanted to show you is that there's definitely ways to manipulate your object in different manners, and it's up to you to choose the valid and the most efficient approach to your, how should I say it? Well, animation, okay? Because sometimes rigs and bones are a lot easier to manipulate than this stuff, but the rigging has its own set of problems. So if we take a look here, just before we finish this video, I wanted to show you something else. So apart from the deform here, which is the same deform, by the way, from here, this is exactly the same menu, we've got the skeleton, we got the skin. I'm just going to pop these open to show you something real quick. Skin. I'm not going to be doing this in this video. We're going to do this in the next video. Going to go over these menus. But what's important to understand is these joints, right? I'm just going to click and create a couple of joints in the top, for example, in this case. So if I create a couple of joints here, notice that these are essentially our objects, which we will be manipulating. So this is our basically joint chain, and then we can grab, let's say, this joint, and we can rotate it, and this would be something like an arm. Right, you will see that the chain of command, so to speak, goes from right to left because I started with this bit and going to the last bit. We're going to talk about parenting and constraints later and how this whole thing operates. But it's important to understand that joints essentially allow you to move a particular object in a particular manner. Now, obviously, you need to align them. I'm going to show you a real nice trick on how to get this thing aligned very fast upon placement, because this is annoying. But for demonstrative purposes, what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab this whole chain here, and I'm going to bind the skin. Now, this is going to do this stuff automatically, but essentially what will happen is you will now be able to manipulate the skin of your object. So, as you can see, this is another form of animating, because this will allow you to move objects based on your joints, okay? Depending on how you set up your joints, this will also reflect on your final mesh. Obviously, this is not how we're going to work, because this is not going to work right in this case. So this parenting, this hierarchy is not great. But essentially, what's going to happen is at some point we're going to set this up in such a way that this will allow us to move our object in a much more believable manner. As you can see, right now, this is like you can have a joint outside the object, but ideally you'd want it to be at the center of your object. So we maybe we will use more than one chain. We could use, I don't know, 3 or even 4 chains here. And as you can see, they're all part of a hierarchy here in the outliner. So I'm going to delete these, by the way. I'm going to unbind the skin just so that we don't screw this up, right? And then I'm going to go ahead, I believe I need to actually select it, and then unbind the skin. There we go. So now they're separate. So as you can see, there's definitely ways to work with this. It's just that both of these methods have their own pluses and minuses, especially with this one where you have the paint skin weights. In other words, just like the soft select where I showed you at the beginning, the skin weights here essentially tell you, let's say we would select this joint here, right? We would select this joint. We would tell it that we want just that amount of influence, as you can see here, right? So your joint, this joint, we would tell it, yeah, we want it to be very strong at the center where it's like closest to it, right? And then there's going to be a fall off maybe until here, right? And then this joint will take over and they will split the difference between the two. So you want, for that purpose, to have as many faces as possible for deformation. In our case, we have way too many, obviously, so we're going to have to retopologize this, especially because we also have a bunch of triangles right over here. As you can see, these are all triangles, right? If you take a look here, we've selected one triangle and one polygon, okay? So we got only triangles. So this is obviously not good. Let me just focus in on this. So you can see that there's way too many polygons here that we don't need in our game. Obviously, our game is not performance heavy. Even if I suspect even if we leave this like that, the amount of objects on the screen will not put a strain on almost any computer, probably not even on a phone. But it's always a good idea to limit your polygons to a degree where you still get the animation that you require. In other words, the deformation that you require without compromising your performance. So you have to, it's a balancing act, okay? Anyway, I think this is all I'm going to talk about this stuff in the next video. I think this is it for here. But we're going to be working with the outliner as well. It's very important. Let me just rename this sucker to worm, or I don't know, player worm. A little bit more appropriate, don't you think? So yeah, we're gonna go over all these menus, and at the end of the day, rigging, animating, and setting joints, they're all really one big thing. Obviously, all of these have their own specialists, okay? You could be a technical artist who would basically do the rigging bit, because rigs can be very, very, very complicated. In other words, you can have a rig for the face with up to 200 bones in the face, like imagine 200 joints, all with different controls, all of them controlling different parts of the face, right? And because, one more thing, by the way, because the joints are inside the, object, obviously there's ways, like look at this, for example, it's just in the middle right now, almost. But because the joints are inside the object, it's very hard to select them. And if you have many joints, this will be quite a pain, okay? Because once we bind them together, this will be very annoying. So obviously you can X-ray the joints, or you could set this up as a reference. In other words, you could open the damn it, I always mix them up. You can open up the channel box here. We could create a new layer, call it player. Well, player, and we can make this, I don't know, pipal. We can make it pipal. And then, excuse me, and then add the selected object, and we can set it as a, as a reference, I believe. This will make it unselectable, and then we can place our stuff over there, right? So this will mean that only our joints will be selectable. Won't be able to select this object at all. I think there's also, this is for rendering, by the way. So there's either a template, which in this case would be with a wireframe, or a reference, which I think you can actually set it up so it's like half transparent. But we're not going to do that. We're going to get rid of this layer, delete layer. There's other ways to do this. So in our view, for example, shading, we can go X-ray joints, which are currently like that, and we can disable selection of these objects here, either with a layer, or I believe there was some other way. I haven't done this in a while. At least isolating stuff. I just use either layers or just the X-ray joints. Anyway, so there's that, guys. So you can imagine there's quite a lot of stuff to do. And one more thing, yeah, I forgot to mention here, is that once you have your skeleton rig, this is a skeleton, right? This is called a joint chain. If we go take a look, it's called like joint 1, joint 2, joint 3, and they're all parented under each other. So this is the main parent, right? And this is the final child, right? So this is the root. But ignoring that, I just wanted to say that these things will become quite annoying to work with if you do not have controllers for it. In other words, you need something that will essentially um, modify this thing's features, right? For example, you want to rotate. Now, every time you want to rotate, this means you have to find the exact bone. Like, imagine you had a lot of them. You have to find the exact bone that you want in the exact same hierarchy. Remember, these probably won't be one after another. Maybe you'd have two, which would be like parented to only these two. They won't be parented to some. They'll be parented to some root in the middle, maybe. You know, it all depends on how you create your joint hierarchy. But the important bit is that at the end of the day, you're going to need something simple and easy to work with, so that you don't have to select these joints. Not to mention that in most cases, you wouldn't want to accidentally maybe spin it in some other direction. Like, for example, maybe this joint only wants to spin, and you only want it to spin left and right, and maybe only want it to be able to move left and right, okay? Not up and down or forward and backwards. That's not what you want to do. So you'd want to limit this kind of stuff, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to work with stuff that basically creates believable movements. You don't want to, like, if this was our worm, you don't want your worm to be in this position, okay? Like, this is not a position for your worm that it will ever be in, right? This is not a position for a worm, unless it's some very specific animation, like, I don't know, falling animation. Obviously, this wouldn't be the hierarchy. But the point is, if you can imagine that our worm would be in this position, that's not what you want to do. And that's why you would be limiting the joints, the way you basically talk to these joints, not, you know, just say you want to only rotate it by X or by Y or whatever, in our case Z. So you really need to set up controllers, and these controllers can be anything. Ideally, they're usually just curves, which I still haven't created a hotkey for the curve tool, but maybe I will at some point. Maybe I'll just have like a hotkey for these menus, probably Control A, because Control A pops out the attribute editor, which you're already using. But as you can see here, you'd create either a curve, a specific curve, or just create a primitive, something of the sort of this. Oh, my bad. Create a NURBS primitive, like a circle, right? And then you have your circle stay above your target, right? For example, like this. And this circle, for example, would only rotate. It basically, you tell the circle that anything you do to that object will be reflected onto this object. So in other words, you do not have to select this bit anymore, okay? It's going to be right here, and it'll be easy enough to select, and you can actually know what you do and why would you do it. So you can have one object for rotating left and right, the other one for up and down, right? And you can say, I don't want to be rotating along the x-axis. That's not what I want to do, so you'll limit that. But anyway, that's enough talk for this video. I think there's quite a few things that we need to talk about before we start actually making controllers, and there's definitely a bunch of stuff when it comes to especially when it comes to constraints, that it's important to understand, because this is one of your main ways to essentially be constraining objects, okay? So basically hierarchical controls. And really that's all. After that, you only got the animation menu, which would be the key, the playback, which you don't really need. Like, you have a time slider here. There's definitely other menus. You can visualize the paths, which would be, by the way, very nice in our case, so you can see how exactly would the object behave in each keyframe. You can actually see for each object how the curves are on the screen, instead of having them like on this editor type deal. Obviously, there's more in-depth stuff, like you can control how much weight each vertex has. But, you know, this is getting into very highly specialized stuff, which you probably won't be using, especially as a solo developer or, you know, a small team of developers. But as you get bigger and bigger, obviously you have a specialist who would be doing this full time, and he would require a technical artist who would rig this object for him, and then as a technical artist creates the joints and the control surfaces or control curves or whatever, then he sends the rig to the animator, and it's up to the animator to set believable animations using these controls. After that, obviously he would export it or send it to the guy with the textures. So the UV guy and the texture guy essentially would cut the UVs for this and texture it, and then it will import it to the Unreal Engine, so that the level designer can you know, design the level with the object, right? Or in this case, it would be our player. So maybe it would be some other guy who would be, you know, basically in charge of player controls and basically player behavior or whatever, and then maybe the AI guy would use this for some other reason, maybe some hit scanning or I don't know. But as you can see, there's definitely quite a lot of work involved in exporting stuff and making things. So especially when it comes to animating, you really want to be on point with your basics, because most of the stuff in animation is pretty much set in stone. In other words, you can really, it's really simple in terms of concept. It's just you say frame 1 it's here, frame 2 it's here, and then in between you can set whatever you want, and the computer will do the rest for you. But the way you actually make it work is quite a little bit more complicated. So it's nice to just take it slow and easy. Obviously, we're not going to be making spiders with 15 legs or humans with like 200 joints or anything else. So you really want to start nice and slow, nice and easy. In our case, we'll just be using this as an example, and we're going to work from there. But this is a nice base on which you can build up upon. At least that's all I know anyway. I haven't done any high-tech, high animation stuff, so I wouldn't really be the best guy. There's obviously other guides, but since this is a playlist with all the stuff that you need to know to make a game from start to finish, right? No download these assets, no none of that. So basically, you just want to play around with this as we go along, all right? Anyway, guys, I'll see you in the next video when we start talking about the skeleton and how to set up joints and what do all these menus do. Half of which we won't be using anyway because they have to do with humans, which clearly this is not a human, unless you think it is, for which reason, I don't know why. Right, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.